Hello, this is Professor Urban, and today's clip here has to do with how to read a scientific paper. And I think before I would start that, maybe I'll show you a couple of scientific papers. Here is one in the Journal of Applied Science. I'm going to magnify it a bit. You can see at the top the title. It's a perspective article, whatever that means. And it's written by people that I know, it turns out. Hilfiger, because it's a field that I've been in, and so on. And then that paper, we'll talk more about how to read a paper like that. Here's another one. This one is by Arteaga. I had some questions on his work and called him on the phone. This is a paper, starts with an introduction and so on. We'll be talking about that in more detail. Here's just another. I just want to see a couple of papers. This one happens to be, again, by Arteaga. I just happen to have those on the top of my pile. So, how do you read a paper? And what is a paper? So a scientific paper is in a scientific journal. Well, that's fair enough to ask what a scientific journal is, don't you think? Let's see what Wikipedia calls it. Wikipedia says scientific journal is a periodical, meaning it comes periodically, is published, and intended to further the progress of science. Okay. And that can be in a very wide range of different fields. If we take a look at the rest of this article, we can see it has information about standards and wording. Here's a paper from Nature, which is a journal, and talks a little bit about the content, scope, and so on. My plan here is to do a better job than that article and tell you a little more detail, not necessarily better, more detailed. So it was originally true that these scientific journals were printed on paper, sent to libraries, bound in books, and put on the shelves in the stacks. And when you wanted to find an article, you had to go to the library, physically locate the thing, bring it down, photocopy it, and that was your option. Now they're also appearing online, and articles that are published on paper are also archived in PDF format, so you can get them more quickly online. You don't have to go there. Fantastic. These articles are usually scientific in nature. There's a very wide range of different articles out there. What are they? They're short and to the point. They don't want a lot of duplication. This is not a book. It's not a text. It's something new in a small package. And the articles are authored by researchers and their research teams. And they report only new findings. That's exactly what they're supposed to do. So, just a second. So, where do we find these articles? Oh, I skipped ahead. They're reviewed by 2 or more experts before they are appearing in the publication. So there's been a little bit of looking over these articles before they end up. You can find them in libraries, you can find them online. And the journals are supposed to be reporting things that are new. Let's go to the next page. And it's so new that sometimes the initial stuff is wrong, turns out to be wrong over time, and further inquiry is required by other researchers to duplicate the results and to confirm the result. So until they're confirmed, what's our takeaway here? Read carefully. Think of the article as being the opinion of the author And more than one article and more than one researcher is needed before we should take it in as knowledge. So what is the scientific process? Some researcher or group makes what they think is a discovery. We also, I'll say, finding. The findings are reported as a conference presentation usually at first, and then they go on to a journal article. And then they're repeated by others or attempted to be repeated. And more articles start to appear in journals, in related journals. And as the findings are confirmed, then they become accepted as knowledge, always subject to the fact, okay, this can be improved, something better may come about after this. And the continued work will move on. And this topic that was published in one and then many journals will be set aside, and that topic won't appear in new journal articles unless something is found where it has to be. This eliminates duplication if it's done right. So, who determines that the work is novel and is publishable? Good question. The system as a whole works on peer review. And a peer is somebody who has standing in the field, has knowledge in the field, is known to the editor of the journal, and who has enough sufficient expertise to read and basically grade the result of the manuscript, and if it passes the review phase, usually required changes by the author, then it ends up being printed in the journal, and then you see it in the journal. And the editors also will weigh in, and they'll look to see that it's novel, that's not new, it's not something that's been published before. What's looked at? Is the English good, if it's an English language journal? Is it the right length? Too short, doesn't work. Too long, the journals can't handle that much. Is the format appropriate? We'll talk about that in a moment. Are there the proper number of figures, and are they all necessary, and are they clear, and can you read them, and on and on. So these are the things that the reviewers and the editor look at, and if they pass that, all those standards, then it ends up getting published and put into the public domain. Then another level of review takes place, which is once it's out there and other people can see it. Initially, only the authors of the work and the editor and the reviewers can see it, but after that it can be seen by anybody. And now we see if it will become accepted widely or not. And other articles will begin to get published. You get the idea. And as the weight of publications grows and it starts to find agreement, then we're going to say, oh, well, maybe this is knowledge. We can start working on the next problem. Now, what about the journals? The journals are not all created equal. It's estimated that there are more than 30,000 different journals. So there's journals in engineering, there's journals in biology, you name it, there's journals, and in which there's something research and scientific being done. So it's also estimated that there are nearly 2 million articles published annually. Oh my goodness, how do we get to that? That's a different topic. Scholar Google is my answer. So the question is what journal you should be reading, and how much importance is there in picking one journal over another, and that kind of thing. It's not a simple question. If the journal has a high reputation, you have a tendency to say, well, I can read it, I believe it. It's the New England Journal of Medicine, so I can believe it. But then guess what? Now and again, those papers actually get retracted by the author later when they find that they've made a mistake. That happened a couple of times just in the last year and a half, to my knowledge. So sometimes excellent work can appear in a journal that you don't think the title would support the effort. No, so don't let the title be your guide. Sometimes poor work appears in reputable journals. Bottom line, talk to your friends. There's no like master list of what's a good journal. It's a good journal for what? For your article? How do you know that? It gets to be very subdivided. Talk to your friends and read the journal and develop a sense of critical thinking and reasoning. The the journal articles, because there's such a number of them, 2 million, my goodness, can you imagine? I mean, how could you possibly keep track of 2 million journal articles and read them all if they all had their own format and each author had his own way of doing it? And you know, that isn't going to work, right? Give me a break. So it pretty much has to be standardized in order to get in it, and they're pretty standard. And so each journal article starts out at the top with title, authors, abstract. Let me give you an example of such a journal article. I happen to pick one that I know well. Here is the title. Now, it might be a little small. Maybe I can increase the size a bit. I have to lean forward to see it. Yeah, that's the size increaser. And we've made it a little bigger, and I'll make it even a little bigger yet. And maybe some of it will fall off the edge, but better that than not be able to read it. So here is the title of this particular article. And here are the authors, and you can see my name, Professor Barton and Professor Schubert. And you can see where it appeared and how to find it. We'll talk about that another time. And so on, and where it's published, the American Vacuum Society. See, it's a funny sounding name. What, are they cleaning rugs? Not at all. So after we get through that, I think I mentioned that there would be an abstract. So I'm just tabbing down into the journal. Here's the actual journal. That was just like a folder containing it. And it tells you the affiliations of the authors. Always a good idea to check on that. Here's an abstract. It's a short description of what is, and I know it's running over the edge, but I want it to be big enough to be seen, that the abstract tells you what the journal article contains, so that you can know whether or not you really want to read it. Then it goes to an introduction. So let me go back to my notes. And after, you see right away, introduction, then a background, and this is pretty standard. It's not every journal is identical, but pretty standard. Theory, if there's theory to be dealt with. Experimental, if there's experimental work to be described, the equipment and the methodology and so on. And then results, and sometimes, and then discussion. So sometimes those are included together, results and discussion, more commonly that they are actually. So then this is where you read how did they do it, and what did they do, and then what do they think it means. And you're going to have at the end of it conclusions. We learned this, this, and that. And those are the 3 things we learned here. And we're ready to move on to the next questions. And thank you very much for the people who helped us with acknowledgments. Citations means in the article, you're going to tell whose work, prior work, did you mention and whose did you build on, and then the appendices. Let's take a quick look at that. And we'll go down through this article. Again, purposely, it's big enough that you can possibly see it. Here's a nice figure. Here's theory section, and we're going down through. Here's the experiment, how the crystals were made, and so on and so forth. We go further down, how the measurements were made, and so on. And then the solutions. How did we find solutions, mathematical solutions? Because there's a lot in this paper on that topic. And then that gets well described. And finally, we get into looking at the data, some graphs. You get the idea. I don't need to belabor it. More graphs. And here's something about a topic, intensity of the reflection. There's the graph, and so on. So that it follows a fairly standard pattern. Here's some more findings. Do the red dots and the black dots agree with each other? They look like they do. Why is that? And what did we learn? And down we go. I'm not going to review this paper for you right now. And you see more figures. This paper had a lot of figures. And looking at smaller points and looking at the effects of etc. There's a block diagram of the computer program, procedural guidelines, and a summary. Here we are, summary and conclusions. And here are the references. That was the part that I especially wanted to bring up, which is that, let me move it over. Throughout this work, reference was made to prior work by other researchers, and we need to say who they are and where their articles were located. So what articles are referenced in this one, so that the reader can go and say, oh, Berriman, fascinating article, and they can get it because it's the name of the journal and the information that it would take to find it, 1972 of all things. Here's one by one of the authors, Schubert, a very, very nice paper in 1996. Another Schubert. So we referenced ourselves from time to time, other prior work of our own and prior work of other people, and you can see that the references grew, and this is actually a reference of a book. Okay, so that's the standard layout, which you can see by getting a paper and looking at a paper. So let me summarize what we have accomplished here today in this clip. This clip was about how to read a scientific paper, and it starts out with what it is. It's a periodic, it's a paper appearing in a periodical put out by a journal or appearing in a journal. And you find them in libraries and online, and they're supposed to report new stuff. What is the scientific progress? Okay, read carefully. Be careful about this stuff. It takes a while before agreement comes and it becomes credible. Then, what is scientific process? A few people do something, they spread the word, other people try it. Once they start to agree, then more and more papers come up, and pretty soon it's regarded as knowledge. Who decides the work is novel and publishable? Initially it's the journal editor and the reviewers, but ultimately once it gets into the journal itself, then it's the community of people who are working in that area and who are reading the articles. And if they don't like it, it will not have traction and be accepted. Not all journals are equal. Don't fall into the trap of thinking, oh, if it's in a certain journal, it's automatically good, or if it's in another one, it's automatically bad. Sometimes very fantastic articles aren't referenced very often. Some people look at a lot of references, they think it's good, maybe it's not. There's an almost universal format, which we rolled through, and that's it. So I hope this helps you learn to read papers with a more critical eye, and that you learn something, and for that, I should put myself up, right? For all of that, I salute you.